Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Realcomm Live. Good to be here. As I started late last year, I try to name the episode in a word or two to give an idea of where the topic sits: fun, interesting, innovative. This week's topic, two words: extremely important. I'll give another two words: sometimes overwhelming. The topic this week is ChinaTech. And when you hear the word ChinaTech, the average person really doesn't know what that means. Are they suggesting we're talking about Alibaba? A lot of people don't even know who Alibaba is. And so ChinaTech in our world started in about 2004. Realcomm took a delegation of real estate professionals to Asia. We went to about 7 cities in 5 countries: Tokyo, Seoul, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Beijing, Kuala Lumpur, and Singapore. And on that trip, we went to like I said, we went to Beijing and Shanghai. And in 2004, imagine that, that's 19 years ago, the level of innovation, the level of passion, the level of the pace of progress was frightening. And we came back and we tried to talk to everybody and said, there's so much going on over there. You got to go see it. You got to go see it. So you fast forward to 2019 in Nashville, we had a private meeting on ChinaTech. And this time it was getting a little bit more refined, saying, okay, what are the implications of the pace at which China is developing technology? How does it impact the built environment? And then we took a little bit of a hiatus to the pandemic, but this year we're bringing it back. And our guest today, Warren Wilson, who's the director of the economy for the Special Competitive Studies Project, SCSP, and he's going to explain a little bit to what that is. We first had Warren at CoreTech in November to begin introducing this topic to the Realcomm community. So why don't we bring on Warren and we'll get to the conversation. Hello, Warren. How are you?
Hello, Jim. Thanks. It's a real pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you. Before we get started, you're going to give the definitions of SCSP. Why don't you give everybody a little bit of your background, just so they have some context on where you're coming from and what your area of expertise is?
Sure, Jim. As you mentioned, I'm Director of Economy here at the Special Competitive Studies Project, or SCSP, where I focus a lot on digital infrastructure and economic policy, particularly with respect to national security. My background is I was working with the State Department as a foreign service officer, primarily on building economic relations with other countries. I've worked in Beijing and Ukraine, and also here in Washington, where I'm sitting now.
Awesome. So yeah, it's an interesting intersection when we talk about real estate technology, and now we throw in China. Okay, and a lot of our listeners are probably saying, "What does this have to do with me? I own a building, and I'm putting in some smart building technologies, maybe some wireless so the phones work. How does this impact me?" And hopefully by the end of this show, they're going to have a little bit better idea. And as I mentioned, at CoreTech, our relationship is really just getting started. It's about 6 months now. We want you to be able to leverage our community to get information out through us on how this stuff might impact buildings, right? So let's go to the first slide and give everybody a little overview on what exactly is SCSP and the mission, the landscape, everything that is SCSP.
Sure, Jim. So SCSP is a Washington-based foundation focused on strengthening U.S. technology policy and long-term competitiveness amid really rising technology-driven competition geopolitically with China and other adversary countries. SCSP was founded by former Google CEO Eric Schmidt, who you may be familiar with. What you may not know is that after he left Google in 2015, he spent several years at the Defense Innovation Board at the Defense Department and also at the National Security Commission on AI, and was very troubled by what he saw there. Particularly America's, quickly falling behind China in key technology areas. So he was inspired by what we call the Special Studies Project, which was led by Nelson Rockefeller and Henry Kissinger in the 50s, that was focused on galvanizing a national strategy for competing with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. At the time, SSP wrote a quote here at the bottom of the slide: "A nation which does not shape events through its own sense of purpose eventually will be engulfed in events shaped by others." I think Dr. Schmidt saw the American technology landscape quickly becoming engulfed by other actors. So He founded the SCSP because he was concerned that America would not organize strategically to address broader technology competition and the risks that posed in the context of China dominating technology. So our work is focused on 6 key areas: on foreign policy, defense, intelligence, economy, society, and future technology platforms, and how all of these are being remade by technological change.
So let's just focus on Eric Schmidt for 1 second.
Mhm.
Brilliance on display at Google, okay, and then he went to, it was the DoD Innovation Lab. Did you say it was called?
The Defense Innovation Board, yes, which is
Okay,
a new board that he stood up. He helped found to address technology deficiencies in the U.S. Defense architecture and military.
it sounds like some of the best foreign policy chess players that the U.S. has. I mean, some smart people.
Absolutely,
Okay,
yes,
so he goes and spends some time there and says, my gut was kind of right. These people, our collective conversation substantiated the fact that in key areas, 5G, AI, immersive, lots of different technologies, that side by side, inch for inch, that the U.S. is falling behind in some of these key critical areas. Fair?
correct, and that in many of these cases, even where we're ahead, China, the People's Republic of China, not the society, but the government of China often has a strategy to dominate these technology platforms, and the United States does not.
Yeah, I've read, summaries of some of their, 5, 10, 15-year plans, and it is very clear that they want to dominate in AI, in green technologies, autonomous vehicles, 5G, 6G, 7G, whatever. And to your point, capitalism and democracy are the best, combination on the planet, but sometimes not as efficient. And when you've got a plan being designed and directed out of a central policy point, i.e. the CCB, it becomes very efficient in getting that out. Now, the good news is, I think, is that we've got innovation and free-spirited, entrepreneurs on our side. So it sounds like SCSP is trying to bring together the best of all worlds to formulate that plan. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. We're trying to help bring together that strategic vision that we have seen as lacking in U.S. authorities. We do have some of the best technology in the world, absolutely, but we've had slip ups such as Chinese firms moving ahead and leading the world in developing 5G technology, network hardware, and holding the biggest share in global 5G networks, which it wasn't that long ago that the U.S. possessed the best telecom technology in the world.
In the world, yeah. And I've been trying to get my messaging straight for almost 20 years now, because it's a sensitive topic. People don't like to hear that we're not number one, right? And so I always have to start my statements by, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just bringing you information that you may not be aware of. And so through through 2023, Realcomm and all of our events, IBCon, CoreTech, we're going to try to weave this conversation in a productive, positive way, and to make sure that anything we can do to keep the built environment technology globally competitive, that's what we're hoping our relationship can possibly do. So tell me, Ian, next slide if you could, what are some of the key areas of tech that you're focusing on?
Sure. We've identified the 3 foundational technology platforms that we consider central to U.S. security, competitiveness, and just democracy, as AI and the broader software landscape, semiconductors, and 5G, and just advanced networks more generally. So these are fundamental platforms, not just for cyberspace, but really to all of society. And while America has led the world in cutting edge tech for decades, we found ourselves increasingly dependent on China, sometimes exclusively so. The PRC has made tremendous strides in artificial intelligence and semiconductor production, and as I mentioned, overtaken American firms in producing 5G equipment. And people, turning around, what's the response to this? People may ask, are we suggesting that the U.S. government should try to out China and develop a more top-down, state-directed model for developing these critical technologies? And I'd say the answer is absolutely not. we're calling for a strategy, based on leveraging our U.S. strengths, including our markets, our democracy, our openness. But we do need a clear vision to fill national security gaps in technology that the market isn't addressing. And simultaneously, part of this process is creating a more coherent technology governance model in America that includes data and AI governance.
Well, yeah, and part of me looks at all the money that we've invested in technology over the last 10, 15, 20 years. And to be in this position of losing our dominance really makes you scratch your head and saying, maybe our process and our formula for innovation needs a little tweaking, right? Maybe it's not as efficient or, more importantly, effective as it could be.
And furthermore, this is also about, China risk aside, this is also about our supply chains and the fact that so much of our communication supply chains are not American, but originate in one location in China that can be subject to zero COVID lockdowns, means subject to other disruptions, is in itself a risk.
So of the three areas, the hardware, microelectronics, chips, AI, and then 5G wireless, did SCSP have any fingers in the CHIPS Act and all the activity we're seeing now bringing chip manufacturing back to the US, or was that already underway before your organization was formed?
I mean, clearly there was a lot of momentum behind the CHIPS Act for the reasons I was, mentioning earlier: concern about U.S. losing chips production, concern about supply chains. We in our position, we're as a private foundation, we have published a number of reports, with policy recommendations. We're constantly talking to government officials here in relevant agencies and in Congress to explain to them the research that we're doing and recommendations for what policy direction can be taken on with respect to chips and all these battleground technologies.
And from what I've learned of you, between Eric Schmidt's reputation within the tech business community and all of the subsequent people now at SCSP ties into Washington, it feels like you guys are going to kind of try to be the bridge between the business sector and the political sphere, correct?
Absolutely. And that's part of why we're structured the way we are as a private foundation. Many government officials who need the expertise of businesses, such as in your industry, often are restricted in terms of how they interact with those businesses. I think many businesses are not really sure where to plug in when they're dealing with government or policymakers, and many of us at the foundation have formerly worked in the government, and we do want to provide that bridge.
In some of my readings, the year 2030 keeps popping up as a critical year. Basically saying we got about 7 years to bring awareness to the level it needs to be and to start to turn the ship. Otherwise, we could find ourselves at a very serious disadvantage. Is that 7-year 2030 assessment accurate?
That's our assessment, that this is a crucial period in technology development. It's a crucial period for both America and China in terms of our internal dynamics. They're potentially, we've seen China's demographic situation is already changing, and the Chinese government sees technology as a real solution for its for not just success domestically, but for increasingly for global dominance. And so
I'm sorry, finish your thought.
No, that was it.
What are the implications of China winning this race?
Sure, and a lot of people ask this understandably because it's not always a simple answer, but I think the upshot is this is not just a commercial competition. This is not a question of whether other competitor companies from other countries are winning contracts versus U.S. companies in terms of chips or AI. Where China has exported its technology, which is increasingly doing around the world. It's also sought to export its technology policy and governance norms, whether related to censorship, surveillance, and network fragmentation. And the PRC government is actively advocating for a more fragmented, oppressive internet globally, as opposed to the open internet that we've all benefited from for the last 40 years. And I'd say ultimately, PRC dominance of these technologies, of the communications highways, that can result in massive security surveillance vulnerabilities as we move into the internet of everything in the next few years. It means lost economic opportunities for Americans and many others. It means potential military weakness, and it means just a fundamental reshaping of the open internet and open societies.
Right.
Now, this is a pessimistic vision. It's a visioning exercise we did at the start of our research, but I'm certainly we're far from this type of outcome. And with the right moves by U.S. policymakers, U.S. businesses, and our allies, we can certainly head off this possibility. But it's not a given, and we have to act in order to do so.
I'm going to say this once before we take the break and then once at the end. For anybody listening, please go up to scsp.ai. The reports are stunning. They are extremely well written. One is 180 pages or so. It's not a brief read. I think I'm 2/3 through it, and all the subsequent interim reports. So let's take a quick break to hear from one of our sponsors, and then when we come back, we're going to continue this great conversation.
Every building has a story to tell. What is your building saying, and who's listening? A building can be seen as a living thing. It consumes, breathes, circulates, senses, and produces waste. Buildings are comprised of different and complex subsystems, like elevators, security, fire safety, and HVAC that generate a ton of data. What are you doing with your data? What if you could visualize all of your data on an integrated mobile platform? What if today's data could prescribe and predict actions for tomorrow? What if you had situational awareness that could monetize these optimizations in real time? Your building has always had a heart in the engine room. But what if it had a brain? Introducing Nantum, the world's first operating system for the built environment. The new brain for your building.
All right. So see, we do have some technologies coming to keep us competitive in this space. I was with the guy who had the vision for Nantum when the spark hit him, and it's good to see that company, Prescriptive Data and Nantum, are doing so well. So give me, let's bring out the next slide, and let's talk about some of the specific companies that are on your radar.
Sure, thanks, Jim. And so these companies that we've highlighted here, these are companies that the FCC or other U.S. government authorities and frankly other governments abroad have identified as problematic for often functioning in suspicious, opaque, non-commercial ways. Frankly, I think people are familiar with Huawei and ZTE and the risks that our government has identified with those firms. With companies like Hikvision that providing surveillance equipment that not only have problematic ties to the Chinese military, but are implicated in really serious human rights abuses in China. But I've put these up here less about, these are just examples of companies, but to underscore kind of two general points about relying too much on these large PRC firms for communications equipment, particularly like what might be used in intelligent buildings. And these two just overarching facts are, these companies, in many cases, they're not operating like commercial entities in the way competitors from other countries might. They're operating with extremely opaque corporate governance, often potentially under political influence, and making suspicious moves, whether it's Huawei taking on unprofitable contracts in rural America near military installations or other examples. And the second concern, the second piece I want to highlight with this is that Washington and policymakers in Washington are taking notice and acting. It doesn't seem like the two parties agree on much of anything these days, but there is broad bipartisan concern right now about the risks China origin technology opposed to US networks and US society.
Well,
Um,
at a practical level, one of my contacts who sells a major component for the tech intelligent building enterprise, and his territory is South America, and he said basically the process is simple. Every time they get his proposal, they hand it to the Chinese, they cut it in half, and they basically say better technology for half the price, right? And that half is being subsidized by the CCP for other reasons, just business gains, right? And then this gets into the conversation of, yeah, it's not just these specific companies, but the components in other systems that we would install into a smart building. I mean, you really would have to rip that whole piece of that whole box apart to see all the components, to see if there's some potential technology in there that runs a risk.
Absolutely, and I think that's something where an area of research we'll be publishing on pretty soon here. But I wanted to highlight the example that had on the slide of the quote unquote rip and replace policy, under which FCC was mandating that telecoms that have used Huawei and ZTE network equipment not only cannot buy but have to actually rip out and replace that network gear. And just for your listeners, imagine this. Today it's it's 5G telecom networks. Tomorrow potentially it's IoT. Imagine if in the future the U.S. government would identify a similar risk in PRC-made IoT sensors and force commercial real estate developers to replace them with trusted components. I mean, that would, not that there's any indication that's happening anytime soon, but just imagine what kind of a nightmare that would be.
Well, it is actually happening. And in this case, I don't believe it was China. It was another major nation state. But one of our community found some malware in a piece of industrial equipment in the building, sleeping inside inside the multiple layers of software of that piece of equipment with no particular go date, but could have been activated remotely at any point in time. And it could have caused physical, possibly damage, as well as reputational harm. So we've already seen some instances, not at big scale, but at some point the danger is real, and it needs to be taken serious. So wrapping up, do you see implications for our environment, the built environment, with everything that we've talked about?
Yes, absolutely. So firstly, just the issues of the need for greater supply chain assurance for 5G networks, as they're moving into the enterprise level and private networks that I know many of your companies you work with are interested in. So supply chain assurance for enterprise 5G and IoT networks, given both risks of PRC technology and also policy actions from Washington. I think that's one big takeaway. Another big takeaway is that enterprise 5G network technology, it's obviously a massive, potentially massive commercial opportunity, but it's now being seen as it's a strategic opportunity. The Department of Defense, for example, is investing over 600 million in enterprise 5G networks on military installations. So I'd say this, extra emphasis on enterprise 5G as a strategic imperative. It's not only, it's a potential great opportunity, but it also means there may be more scrutiny, particularly around network security of those types of networks.
Well, as I've mentioned to you in the past, our community, Realcomm, IBCon, CoreTech, and all the other events we do. My partner Howard's just coming back from London. He just did an event in London this past week. We focus on those individuals within real estate companies that focus on technology. So what we can bring to you is a community of 50 billion square feet of decision makers focusing on technology, and we can be a way of distributing your very finely thought out information and insight, so you don't have to scatter about and try to figure out our industry. So I'm hoping you come back. I want to go into that 5G conversation in a lot more detail, because the in-building wireless conversation is lighting up again. And as long as we're aware of things we need to look out, I think we can achieve success and mitigate a lot of the risks.
Excellent, Jim. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and connect with companies you're working with, and I think we and would love to hear from these companies about what the industry needs. There's a lot of policy activity and money being distributed now in Washington around network technology, and we need all the input from companies on the front line, like those that Realcomm.
We're going to organize that intellectual property and bring it to you, so you don't have, like I said, have to go get it. There's a definite interest, a need, and especially from a financial, the resources that are now being made available. I would hate that those monies and funds to go to less deserving people, maybe who are a little newer to the game. I mean, the groups that we hang with, a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge, and are certainly in a good position to help you, win some of these battles. So thank you again for everything you do, and looking forward to continuing the relationship.
Excellent. Thank you, Jim. Take care.
Okay. Have a great day. Be well. All right. With that, let's bring on Nance for the news. Howard, as I mentioned, is traveling back from London, and Nancy's. I don't know how you follow that one, Nance. That was a pretty heady conversation. It's serious. There's no other word to say that we have to listen. We have to be pragmatic, and I'm just grateful to have resources like Warren and SCSP. So,
absolutely.
I'll hand it to you and take us through the news.
All right, will do. Well, good morning. Here's a recap of a few of the articles in our weekly news briefing, which is published every Thursday morning. Our headline story this week is becoming all too common news as yet another tech giant, this time Microsoft, announced a major layoff. They're letting go of 10,000 employees as they brace for slower revenue growth. Along with the headcount reduction, they're also taking a $1.2 billion charge in the second quarter related to severance costs, changes to their hardware portfolio, and the cost of lease consolidations as they create higher density across their workspaces. For those who like stats, according to TrueUp Tech's real-time layoff tracker, so far in 2023, tech companies have laid off 57,914 people. In 2022, that number was 237,874. If you're not quick at math, that's a whopping 295,788 tech people impacted in just the last 13 months. Big number. This week also marked the first major prop tech deal of the year as property services startup Lesson, a tech-enabled end-to-end solution for outsourced real estate property services, agreed to purchase competitor SMS Assist, a facilities maintenance company. The deal went for $950 million. The two companies will serve 250,000 residential and commercial properties nationally and facilitate approximately 2.5 million repair and maintenance orders each year. Lesson was valued at $1 billion in 2021. The transaction consists of both cash and stock, with Lesson raising approximately $500 million in combined new debt and equity, in addition to SMS Assist stockholders exchanging a portion of their stock for Lesson stock. This resulted in an increased combined company valuation of over $2 billion in enterprise value. While prop tech consolidation isn't uncommon, a venture-backed technology startup purchasing an incumbent player is not something you see every day. Next up, let's meet the guy whose algorithm could solve the crisis of America's empty office space. His name is Stephen Painter, a principal at the international architecture firm Gensler. In early 2020, Painter saw a glut of empty office spaces brought about by the pandemic as a sustainability opportunity, converting unused commercial buildings to apartments. Typically, the process of determining whether an office building is a good fit for a residential conversion is long and convoluted, and usually only 3 out of 10 are good fits. Sometimes he and his colleagues would start working out detailed plans for a client before realizing weeks or months later that their buildings weren't feasible. So, Painter created an algorithm that quickly checks viability. Instead of taking months, his algorithm collapses the survey process required to determine a building's viability to mere hours. His work could help enable conversions to happen on a mass scale, which is important given the urgency created by America's rising office vacancy rates. It could also breathe new life into downtowns across North America, as people could return to cities as renters or homeowners instead of just commuters. And lastly, today we're remembering Rudy Reagan, who passed away this week. Rudy's IT career spanned many decades, with the last 27 years spent with Deutsche Bank's Corporate Services Division. He was a long-time and well-respected member of the Realcomm community who served on our advisory council many times over the years, and he was recognized by most as a true pioneer for the industry. Our thoughts and prayers are with his family, friends, and colleagues during this difficult time. He will be missed.
Yeah, Nance, I'm really glad you included that. Rudy just kind of embodies the Realcomm community. You know, sometimes competitors in the same room sharing information, insight to help each other. He was at the top of the heap when it comes to that. I would call him a friend. I've been getting the emails and watching the posts this week. It's terrible. And I think it was somewhat sudden, which makes it all the harder. So, again, thoughts and prayers out for Rudy Reagan, a true hero in our industry. You'll be missed. And then in respect to your other news stories, the thing that strikes me about this week's news is these are big stories. These aren't just, a company announcing a new product or something like that. I mean, the tech layoffs, the paradigm shift of converting offices into apartment buildings, and then this venture deal that's worth $2 billion. I mean, this is industry shifting stuff. And what people may not feel the impacts at this moment, 12, 18, 24 months from now, I think you're going to feel it.
Yeah.
So great job. Thank you much.
Thanks for having me fill in for Howard.
You did a great
Hopefully he's
job.
back next week.
Yeah. Have a great weekend. All right. So before we talk about next week's show, let's hear from our final sponsor, and I'll be right back.
In commercial real estate, success starts with the building. The best-run properties deliver the best tenant experiences, boosting your NOI. Enter Prism by Building Engines, uniquely designed to help you increase NOI from a single building to thousands of commercial properties. Including core features for best-in-class operations, innovative tools to boost the tenant experience, and unique solutions you won't see from any other ops provider. The platform's open API infrastructure connects seamlessly with your in-house systems. See why the world's most successful companies have chosen Building Engines. Visit buildingengines.com to schedule a free demo and see the power of Prism today.
All right. Thanks to everybody on the show today, specifically Warren and the whole team over at SCSP, our sponsors, and of course, our great team that helps put the show together. Next week's topic, my words, top of list. Next generation, hybrid, immersive, experiential workplace. What is it going to take to get people back into the office in a meaningful way? Not just forcing them to come back to the old cube farms, but really taking a perfect blend of technology and space to come up with something they just can't get at home. Our journey on this started actually in the pandemic. We elected to hold the event in 2020, built a little studio in a hotel ballroom in Denver, then went to LA and did it, and then on to Austin and New York, and experimenting all along the way. And during that journey, we met some really good, smart people. And our guest next week, Arun Kaiker, who's co-head of Zaha Hadid, one of the most extraordinary architects in the world. Just go look up some of their projects in the Middle East and Europe and Asia, Singapore, phenomenal. Arjun is going to start the conversation. We are assembling a world-class team of people from both the built environment and the technology environment to begin really getting to the bottom of what does this hybrid experiential office look like. Like I said, perfect combination of space and perfect combination of technology and innovation. So we're excited to have him on next week, and you won't want to miss it. And for now, I'll say goodbye. Have a great day, great weekend. Be well. See you next week. Bye-bye.